Unlike the dialogues of Plato, which were highly polished, finished literary works, most of what we get from Aristotle, maybe all of what we get from Aristotle, is in much more rough form. Um, there's a lot of scholarship about lost works of Aristotle that were more highly polished. But what's actually come down to us is generally thought to be either the lecture notes that he kept for his teaching, or perhaps even notes that his students compiled of what they heard from him. So the point of mentioning it being that the exposition in Aristotle is not always as systematic and as pleasant as it is in other writers. And it's really not much of an issue in this text. Other texts can be more difficult, but you find that he'll talk about one thing for a while, and then he'll talk about another thing, and then he'll come back to his original subject, which is not bad. I mean, I don't think that's bad writing, but you'll see that he does seem to perhaps go off on little tangents, but they're all obviously relevant to the main subject, just not presented in the most felicitous way sometimes. We'll see that come up. But there's a certain logic to his presentation, which is just obvious, right? Like he has argued to the point where he has concluded there is, first of all, a greatest good in life, and that it is happiness. But that the problem then, as he says later on, is that doesn't really say much. That is that he says at a certain point in the translation. I'm sorry if I can't find it. That to say that the greatest good is happiness is a platitude. That it's true, but you're not really saying much, really. I mean, that is, you're not really getting anywhere when you say that we all want to be happy. Of course we do. Yes, it's true, but it's obviously true. It's trivially true. The real problem is to say what happiness is. Uh, what is happiness? And one of the again, I mean, a lot of assumptions here. One is that there is a greatest good in life, which many philosophers would deny. The other is that we can, when we do say that there is a greatest good and that it is happiness, that we can actually have an inquiry into true happiness. That is, immediately, if you say, if you want to have an inquiry into happiness itself, you're basically saying that well, you're implying that some people say they're happy and they're really not. Or think that they're happy, think that they're happy and they're really not. I mean, you can say you're happy and not be happy, covering up unhappiness. But to do an inquiry into the nature of happiness, in the sense of what is true happiness, is to imply that some people think that they're happy, but really aren't. At least that there are different gradations of happiness. That is, someone can be partially happy and not realize what it would mean to be fully happy. And that, I think, that's the way that I think of Aristotle's treatment of happiness. That is that ultimately most of us fail at becoming truly happy. However happy we may think that we are, that most of us do fail at becoming truly happy. And there's a reason for his saying that I hope will become clear. But in any case, there are different ideas of happiness. He has, and this is something that is a common sort of way of discussing the thing in Greek culture, that there are different ideas of the good life that people choose, and he names them here. He says, "For there are, we may say, three prominent types of life. That just mentioned, which would be the life in pursuit of pleasure, what he calls the vulgar type, the political, and thirdly, the contemplative life." So basically, again, this Greek idea that there are three prominent candidates for true happiness, the greatest good, and that would be pleasure, honor, the life of the political person, and thirdly, the contemplative life, which would be the life that is dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. And again, one may say, well, okay, there are different types of people. There's some people who like money and objects and things and all of, like want to be rich. That's their main goal. That's what they think will make them happy and perhaps will make them happy. And there are people who are, in a wide sense, political people in the sense that they want to be, what they really want is to be accomplished and famous and admired. And that's their main thing. And then there are people who are curious, people who really like to find out things, or people who want to know, scientists, philosophers, anybody whose main thing is that contemplation or knowledge is what makes them happy. For years and years, and I've been teaching this, talking about this text with students for years. I would give examples of, let's say, Bill Clinton back in the 90s. I would give him as the example of the political man. At that time, Bill Clinton didn't really have much money, right? He didn't really have much money until he stopped being president. He was governor of Arkansas, which I think paid like $30,000 a year, which is not nothing, but it's not going to make you rich. But that didn't really mean much to him. He wanted to be a politician, and that was his nature, right? That's what made him happy. And the example that I used to give back in the 90s of the person who is devoted to wealth was Donald Trump. But now he is the president, which I can't believe. Maybe I don't want to believe it. Stick my head in the sand. But so we can see. I still think Trump is that sort of person, right? Let's not talk about Trump. But the person whose main focus is wealth, and that the life of happiness, the happy life, is the life of wealth and pleasure, denying yourself nothing, right? And the contemplative life, that's the scientist, the philosopher. That's supposed to be me, right? The college teacher, the philosophy teacher. And I think it is. But none of us are probably strictly one or the other, right? All of us to a certain degree most of us to a certain degree have a certain partiality to all of these goods. But I guess suppose you have to say, if you had to choose, which is the most important, what would you rather have? Great wealth, great accomplishment that would make you an admired historical figure, or great knowledge. It kind of is an interesting way of dividing people up, and also of finding out what your real values are. But in any case, what Aristotle has to do, if he's to really define happiness, or to define what true happiness is, the greatest good, he has to weigh these things and find a way to evaluate them, and to make a choice. Yes, according to Aristotle, most people do fail. It's not that they necessarily are unhappy, but on the deepest level, you might say they're unfulfilled, and that's the real, interesting idea. That is, and I'll tell you. He goes into great length well, not great length, but in other parts of the Ethics, which is a rather long book, he argues for it more particularly. But he does say that the contemplative life is the best life. That the life of contemplation, the life of knowledge, is the happiest life. That the life of pleasure and the political life afford obviously some happiness, but not the kind of deep, full happiness that the contemplative life does, according to him. But you may ask, how can he possibly make that sort of claim? I mean, isn't it just, oh, he's a philosopher, so he thinks knowledge is the greatest good? And well, not really. He has an argument, and it's really upon that your evaluation of him should be based. And I think the most important idea is, gosh, I should be able to find it. I'm sorry. I'm not finding it. I went too far. Bear with me. This is just like being in class where the teacher's looking for the right part of the text. So you're really getting your money's worth. I'm not finding it. I'm going to use good old find. I'm sorry. It's terrible. Right. Okay, here we go. I found it. It's right here in section 7. Yeah, this is where he says, presumably, however, to say that happiness is the chief good seems a platitude, and a clearer account of what it is still desired. That's the idea that, well, if you just say that we all want to be happy at the end of the day, you really haven't said much. You have to specify what that means. And he says this might perhaps be given if we could first ascertain the function of man. That's, I think, the key idea, perhaps the most important idea in the whole reading. The function of man. And by man, of course, he means human being. But it's that word function which is key, right? If I'm not mistaken, it is the English translation, or an English translation of the Greek word ergon, which has to do with the notion of work, like an ergon would be ergon. But you know how in physics an erg is a unit of work, activity is a unit of work. The idea of the ergon is the idea of an activity, of doing something, of engaging in some kind of work or labor or activity. But beyond that, it's not just any old activity, it's the essential activity. Look what he says next. He says, for just as a flute player, a sculptor, or an artist, and in general, for all things that have a function or activity, the good and the well is thought to reside in the function. So would it seem to be for man, for human beings, if he has a function. Have the carpenter then and the tanner certain functions or activities, and has man none? Is he born without a function? Or as eye, hand, foot, and in general each of the parts evidently has a function, may one lay it down that man, the human being in general, similarly has a function apart from all these? What then can this be? This is the key, right? It's easier to see in tools, in artifacts. What is the function of a hammer? What is the function of a knife? What is the function of a chair? What is the function of an automobile? We can say that each of these has a function. Right? That is function or ergon, and the real, let me say this slowly because it's important. The real translation of ergon is not function, it's more like what it was meant to do, or that which a thing was meant to do. If we apply it to living things, we may, in perhaps a naive sense, that the ergon of a bird is to fly. The ergon of a fish is to swim. I don't know. The ergon of a lion is to chase down prey. That is, we can look at those living things just as we can look at a tool like a hammer or a pair of scissors. And from its very structure, and perhaps from observing an animal, we can make certain guesses about how all the parts of that animal or that machine come together to make it perform a specific thing very well. Right? Like take a screwdriver. It can be used for a lot of things, right? Like a hammer can be used for a lot of things, or a key. I carry keys with me all the time, and I definitely use keys to open packages, but that's not the ergon of a key. The ergon of a key is to open a lock. So even though I would say, well, here's a key and you can do all sorts of things with it, I can't deny that its central function, what it's meant to do, is open a lock, even though it also can be handy for breaking the seal on a package. So what he's asking is, okay, we can say, well, what's the function of a police officer? It's to keep the peace. What's the function of a doctor? It's to look after somebody's health. It's a function of a lawyer. It's to protect somebody's rights. What is the function of a human being? Right, there's wait a second. That's different. Well, yeah, it is different, but what Aristotle is saying is that just as we can look at those different artifacts, or those different animals, or those different roles that human beings occupy, and we can identify what the proper function is, right? The ergon, that which those things are meant to do, that we can do it in general for a human being, and we would do that by looking at what the human being is, by observing the human being, that is, by studying human nature. So the idea is that we cannot really say what human happiness is until we really understand what a human being is. There's no way of understanding the proper function of a machine until you understand the nature of the machine. There's no way of understanding the proper role of a lawyer until you understand what a lawyer is. There's no understanding of what is the proper function of human being in general until you understand human nature, or until you have some grasp of it. And the idea of happiness is the happiness would be the doing of the thing that the entity was made to do. The idea is that birds fly, and birds can't be happy without flying. That lions chase down other animals and kill them, and that they really can't be happy unless they do that, because they're all structured to do that, right? This is why zoos are so depressing sometimes, right? So we would have to take a look at human beings. What were they, what were they meant to do? And it would be the doing of that thing that really constitutes their true happiness. And if they did anything else, they really wouldn't be as happy.